Good afternoon, all, and welcome to this virtual cafe session where we'll be speaking to Reid Jones from the Just Be Nice project. And today it was hosted by myself, Brent and Gresby, and Gregor, who are both co-leads in the Codesign Living Labs Network. Before we commence, I'll do an acknowledgement of country. And in considering it a little bit different to how most normally do it, I'd just like to take a second to give a little bit of where I'm from and how easy it is for me to kind of connect with country. So I'm born and raised and still live in Hillsville in the Yarra Valley, surrounded by fantastic mountains at the foothills where the Yarra River runs through. And it's an incredibly strong tie that I have to the Wurundjeri country. And I was reading a book the other day on native species of plants, and I came across this fantastic quote which resonated with me well, because I also work in Fawkner, where it's quite a dense urban environment. So I just wanted to share this quote from a Melbourne-based researcher, Senna Cumston. The cultural context of country is not lost in urban areas. True country may lie dormant under certain circumstances, as it does beneath layers of concrete, bitumen and buildings for long periods of time. It always remembers. And once reactivated and acknowledged through appropriate human interaction, it is revitalised and resumes life. I just think that's a really nice quote that kind of can help us consider what we do and how we do with urban lands, and how we can connect to country. And I also welcome anyone to put in the chat whereabouts you're coming from today, and part of that, acknowledging the traditional custodians and their elders, who may also, and anyone else who may be with us today. In recognition of lived experience, would also like to recognise everyone's lived experience in the room, or the virtual room today, and ask that we speak honourably and respectfully about ongoing emotional distress, experiences of trauma, mental ill health, and the work of caring and experiences of care within this context. Just another note just on language, because there is, it is always something that can bring up the additional kind of thoughts and context around our mental ill health, distress, suicide, social and emotional well-being. And we understand that it might, the language and framing may not always fit well with everyone, and some may experience discomfort. And as always, just feel free to take a break, sit with it, grab a coffee, leave the session if you need to. You can rejoin, or you can watch it when it's uploaded later on. And I'll pass my co-host Gregor to continue the introduction.
Thanks, Brendan. So the Alive Centre has 5 different sectors to it, being the Codesign Living Labs, and we currently have 1,958 members, and the implementation and translation of 45 people, and next gen researchers 249, and lived experience research collective 228, and the Alive collective of 81. And there's our mission, values and vision. We also have a strong underlying of Indigenous philosophies and ways of utilising them in mental health recovery and research. Thank you. So today's host, which will be brought to you by Codesign Living Labs. We all, we operate, we originally started in 2017 from the University of Melbourne Primary Care Mental Health Research Group, and we're lucky enough to get some funding to start the Alive Centre. This is the model, which probably can use this link to see it a bit clearer if you haven't seen it before. Yeah, so next slide. And this is part of our wonderful team and some of their roles, which can also be viewed on the website. Today, we are lucky to have Josh Reid Jones as a guest. He is the pioneer of the Just Be Nice project and has contact with a number of groups through his talks, such as business, schools and communities, and takes a positive view of mental health recovery. So in part of his work, or part of the program's work, some of the basics of life for people recovering from mental health are relieved somewhat, so they can concentrate on advancing their mental health in a way that isn't inhibited by looking for survival process. So things like employment, housing, and other services that take that burden away somewhat. So Josh also shares his experience of adversity from a young age, and how he sort of overcame that and utilizes that to have a positive outlook for other people that are having challenges with their mental health. So without any further ado, pass it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you very much, Brenton and Gregor, for the introduction. I've been speaking for a long time, and it never gets easier to hear your own bio and description read out to you or announced. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to be so generous with your introduction. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I live and predominantly work on Wurundjeri country, and I'm dialing into this virtual cafe from Wurundjeri country that has never been ceded. I'd like to acknowledge the unbroken connection to land, country, air and water, and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that join us here today, or might be watching this later on. I believe it's being recorded to be shared later as well. Ko Ngāti Runui mi Taranaki ngā iwi. I am a proud Māori Australian man, and living in Wurundjeri lands is a great privilege and a great pleasure. And I actually am cognizant that starting with an acknowledgement of country for me is important, because I believe it starts with telling the truth, with an honest start, particularly in these spaces where we're trying to look after people and improve outcomes and opportunities for people. It's important that we're able to tell the truth, that we're able to be honest with one another, with the systems that we engage with. And what better way to start off in a spirit of honesty than to acknowledge on whose lands we are living and working and joining each other today. I think today is a great opportunity, and I took plenty of time to think about what might be the most impactful and interesting and useful kinds of things to talk about today, given the audience and the fantastic work that the Alive Centre do across a range of programs. And I think that one of the challenges that I see when it comes to moving forward with improving opportunities and outcomes and support for people, individuals and communities, and improving understanding of the challenges that people go through, is that we lack in many areas a useful common language, a useful framework to discuss and come together around different experiences, different views of the world, different understandings, different levels of privilege, to better align our aspirations to make sure that everyone gets the help that they need. And so today I'd like to speak about the work that I've been doing for quite a long time, and in that discussion really cover some of the frameworks that we use, some of the ways that we discuss the frameworks that we use, and how I take, I guess, the approach to explaining to people who might not understand how we do things so that they can maybe reframe some of their ideas around social impact and around support and charitable outcomes or mental health care and things of that nature. So those are the things that I'm going to sort of focus on today. And hopefully, you know, there's some useful bits of information in there for everyone that you can use in your own lives, take away and help in your conversations with other people. And it's, I think, one of the things that I've noticed, particularly we see it in times of economic challenge, is that there's a lot of talk about problems, and problems get brought up and then and put on top of the last problem and the last problem and the last problem. And so we have one problem, then 6 weeks later in the news cycle, there's another problem. 6 weeks later, there's another problem. And if you take the view of sort of healthcare, where we see sometimes similar setups where systems are added on top of existing systems, it's possible to forget what underlying structures and what underlying sort of fundamental frameworks are actually informing all of these challenges. And so instead of always focusing on particular individual, more granular problems, it's nice every now and then to step back and say, hang on, how do we fundamentally approach these challenges, and what sort of frameworks are we using that enable us to discuss and move around problems without necessarily having to rank them, but being stronger and having a better, more interrelated understanding of these problems because of the way that we're able to talk about them and integrate them into the things we're trying to pick up and support and solve. So some 10 years ago, or 11 years ago now, I should have double checked that before the chat, I apologize. So I started the Just Be Nice project, and that was off the back of another probably 10 years of work before that, determining how the Just Be Nice project was going to be set up. And I don't have an epiphanous sort of birth story about the Just Be Nice project. I am one of those people who's very fortunate to have not ever really had a crisis of purpose in my life. Since a very young age, I have just been driven and obsessed with answering the question that why don't people get the help that they need when they need it, for as long as they need it, regardless of how they come to need help. And it's a problem that I have taken, or a question I've taken, and I've used it in the Australian context. I've used it in different socioeconomic contexts. I've used it overseas. I've used it for people from different communities. And I think that in that sense, it's a really powerful question, even though it's a bit too long for a pithy byline or a sort of fundraising campaign. It's people will tune out. It's got too many words in it, but it is really critical that we work out and try to make sure that people get the help that they need when they need it, for as long as they need it, regardless of how they come to need help. I think it's a really fundamentally important question to answer. And so Just Be Nice project was started as again, in this spirit of honesty, where I was like, well, what's the real problems? Why is it that we're not, why are we not getting these great outcomes for everyone, particularly in Australia, a very successful country economically, relatively safe country compared to certainly some areas of the world, amazing infrastructure in a lot of contexts that other countries don't have, and yet we're still unable to ensure that everyone gets that help. And it's not for a lack of goodwill. I think there's an incredible amount of goodwill in the country. We see it manifest in a bunch of different ways, but we also see it, in my opinion, directed inefficiently or in the wrong ways, or with good intentions in the wrong directions. And so the Just Be Nice project was set up to try and harness the goodwill and resources that already exist and turn those into the adequate and sort of complete supports for individuals and communities that need help. So that was kind of the genesis. That's kind of the context setting for that. But we then had to decide what are we working towards, and an equality of opportunity, I think, is something that people largely will say as an aspirational sort of outcome that they're looking for. Equality of outcome is often pushed back on by people, I think, often who are trying to maybe just obfuscate the possibilities for human beings, but because it's used sometimes in bad faith, I think. But also it is impossible for everyone to have exactly the same outcomes, and not desirable in many contexts. So how do we give people the equality of opportunity that they need? Sometimes people talk about it as equity, making sure that everyone has the sort of the same shot, the same opportunity to live into the life that they'd like to live into. We often say that we're trying to create opportunities for people to live into, not expectations for them to live up to. And when we wanted to create this sort of equality of opportunity, wanted to start in a spot that is sort of practical, and in a sense universal, taking care of what are really fundamental human needs. And so for us, we focus on housing, employment, and good mental health outcomes. And by taking care of those three things, we're setting people up, whether they're, I suppose, young, 15-year-old with a lot of promise, who's found themselves in a circumstance battling with any one of those sort of three pillars, or you're a 65-year-old person who's recovering from a lifelong battle with an addiction, but you've been able to be supported into safe, adequate, permanent, affordable housing in a community in which you can participate and find connection. You don't have to have a full-time job, but you've got a little something that gives you an opportunity to, again, participate in community, have a little bit of extra money so that you can do the things that you would like to and need to do, and that your mental health is in a good spot, and that you're not negatively affected by your addiction. You're not on your own. You've got the supports that you need to make sure that you're no longer in a negative space or a difficult space as a result of mental health outcomes. And obviously, there's a number of complicated and sort of more detailed conditions that go into those things. We want the jobs to be appropriate. I don't take the view that you should just take any job and you should just take any roof over your head, and that once you sort of tick over a certain milestone, for instance, with your mental health, that's it, you're done and you're off and you're on your own. But that if we don't work to those outcomes, and one of those things, for instance, isn't resolved or taken care of, then you're highly at risk of going backwards on the other ones. You've got good mental health, somewhere to live and no employment, you're at risk of losing the house, and obviously that puts your mental health at risk. If you've got good mental health and a job and nowhere to live, it doesn't take long for that to take its toll, and vice versa. So as a bare minimum, these were the things that we wanted to work towards, and we felt like, okay, this makes sense, and it's something that generally people can understand reasonably quickly, and it's also something that is not commonly taken care of in one place. And navigating a complicated system is difficult for everyone. It's difficult for funders. It's difficult for people who want to participate in helping others, but it is incredibly difficult for clients and people who need help to navigate. And so by aspiring to put the support for those three outcomes in one place, we look at how we can take people from a position of difficulty to a place where they're okay and they've got this kind of equality of opportunity. So to deal with this, these collection of challenges, really important that we start with really, really, really great frameworks to understand what are invariably very different and very dynamic challenges. And so one great example at the moment that I can give you is that say 10, 15 years ago, when I first started working with communities of disadvantage and in social work, which was like 18, 19 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. Oh my goodness, I just realized how old I am. No, nearly 20 years ago. So that's shocking. You guys are watching me age in real time. But around that time, there were some things that were a bit different in the environment. From the 20 years ago to 15 years ago, it was kind of the case that if we could find you employment, make you, get you like gainful employment, that once you had employment, it was reasonably straightforward to then find you a place, say, to rent. And so the challenge was, find the employment, make sure it's okay, make sure it's accessible, make sure you have the skills to participate in it, make sure it's supportive, all those kinds of things. And then once we were able to do that, we were able to pretty much secure sort of a safe and useful place to live. And so the temptation at that time for a lot of organizations, for instance, would be to say employment is the main thing that you need. We need jobs. Jobs are what make the difference. And so we've got to do that, or else, fund us because it's the most important problem. 20 years later, where we are right now, and there are quite a few jobs around in the economy where people are looking for employees, and it is incredibly difficult for love or money to find rental properties that are suitable for people. And so as an organization, your frameworks need to be dynamic enough to handle the fact that over these sort of longer term and sometimes short term cycles, that the environment changes, the nature of people's problems change, different communities face different challenges. And so how do we navigate those? And why are people so bad at navigating those kinds of challenges or leaning into sophisticated supports in a time when we've got the most computing power that we've ever seen and a number of other sort of things available to help us? There is a real reluctance to lean into sophisticated and dynamic systems of support for people for fear of them being, quote unquote, too complicated. And so one of the things that I've identified early days is what I've termed poor impact literacy. And so poor impact literacy is a incapacity to be able to determine what good social impact looks like, to be able to create it or endorse it, to recognize it. And unfortunately, we have quite poor impact literacy as a general rule in the country, and it's not without reason. One of the main reasons I believe that we have poor impact literacy is because we don't teach impact literacy, for one, to people. We don't teach it to kids. We don't teach it to people who are working in the space a lot of the time. We are operating in a very competitive environment, particularly for causes. There's a lot of what I call cause battling, where funding and attention and focus and support for certain issues are constantly fighting with each other to sort of gain prominence or get a leg up so that they're better placed to retain or attract funding, whether it's from the government, from research, from philanthropy. There is this very competitive environment for what shouldn't really be competing interests, but for organizations and for causes that are nonetheless in this sort of marketplace competing all the time. And that results in these kinds of unaligned aspirations, which are a real problem. Now, I believe that one of the reasons that we have this challenge with impact literacy is because of the way that we talk about it, and have talked about it since, say, like visual media became the dominant communication method, particularly for advertising and marketing. And not to upset any advertisers or marketers in the cafe today, but I'm just going to run you through a framework that has been observed, that I've observed, and I want you to think about if this resonates with you, and if you can attach this framework to things you may have seen. Most of the time when we're talking about advertising in this space, whether it's for trying to get support for an intervention or a particular kind of challenge that people or communities face, you'll see advertising that looks like this. It'll start off with number one, with like a video or a photo of someone who is visibly struggling. So we see things like sick children in hospitals. We see visibly rough sleeping people. We see people who look sad. They're giving this kind of impression that they're sad. Maybe you get the black and white overlay and the sad music in that sort of representation of people who are struggling. So you see that. First of all, you see the thing. Then you have some big statistic. It's usually followed up with a big statistic where people will say 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 200,000, 20,000, 1 in 20, this many people this year, this many people last year, this many people across the globe. So you get this big statistic, it's attached to this visual that you've seen, and people sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, wow, that seems like a lot. Then the organization will tend to say, here's the thing that we do. And with the limited attention spans that people have, it's usually very quick. It's usually very quick and very small. We give them some school books, we give them $1, we give them a pat, we ask if they're okay, we just check in, we just make them a cup of tea, we do these things. So it's very quick. And then they ask you to do something, and that again is also something very simple and very easy, very low hanging fruit. So give me $1 a day, go for a run, go to this lunch, show up and have this walk, do these things. And then the fifth thing that happens is they then say, because doing this thing can change someone's life forever. And occasionally it's followed up with like an anecdote or someone saying, that happened to me, it changed my life. But generally speaking, we see these 5 sort of things in order. A visual thing, a big statistic, the thing that the organization is doing or promoting, the thing you can do, which is usually quite simple, and then the call to how impactful it is. You could change someone's life with this thing. And what that's taught people over the years is that you can tell if someone is in need by looking at them, that there is a worst problem because we've got this statistic that's going to the top saying this is the most urgent, the biggest, the worst problem, that there is a relatively simple solution to that problem, that there is a relatively simple way that you can participate in that solution. And by doing that, you'll change someone's life forever. And almost all of that in the real world is not true. You can't tell by looking at someone. It's very difficult to say there's a singular worst problem that's affecting people, and very few people have single issue lives. Small interventions often do small things. Small supports do small things, and changing someone's life forever actually usually takes quite a bit of investment of time, resources, and what is crucially missing from a lot of conversations, trust. An enormous amount of trust. The quicker you want to make an impact, the more trust you need. And if an individual doesn't have trust in the system or the person that is trying to help them, then you don't tend to get those impacts. Because we've been taught over and over again that one small thing will change someone's life forever, there is a real reluctance to hear or deal with solutions that take a little bit longer, because they're like, well, why would we do this thing that takes longer when I've been told that this very short, easy thing will also change someone's life forever? Perhaps that's better, bang for buck, or a more effective way of helping people. And so it's not everyone's fault that they don't understand the complexities of giving help, but that idea that has shaped the poor impact literacy that dominates the way that a lot of funding and people's ideas about difficulties work in Australia is still a problem that we need to be cognizant of as we work to resolve that and improve outcomes for people. So at the Just Be Nice project, we're trying to improve the help that people get, but we're also trying to improve the way that people help people so that better decisions in general are made around good social impacts and good supports for people who need it. And that's really, really important. The system battles because we have a number of sort of short-term interests that are involved. The government have short terms. They also have siloed departments. And so we've got to navigate those. When the housing portfolio is not the same as the mental health portfolio. People treat them as separate issues, when of course anyone who's had insecure housing knows the negative impact that will have on their mental health and things like that. Philanthropy have huge amounts of discretionary funding, and the discretion is of course informed sometimes by poor impact literacy or by just what they would like to fund. And small community-based organizations often have a really good handle on what's going on in that community, but can find it difficult to find the support that they need to continue to just do the job, not even expand, but just to do that job that they do really well for the long term. So the lay of the land makes it difficult as people try and get to the top of the pile to attract funding, attract interest, and then take it from there. And so that makes it challenging to bring people together to solve problems cohesively and with this real spirit of collaboration that is effective for the people and communities that we're trying to serve. Now, people always say, well, how does a Just Be Nice project do that stuff? What's different? And one of the principles that we use is that when you're working with people, you're working in communities, there needs to be someone or some organization or something taking responsibility for the outcome that you're trying to achieve and coordinating the necessary parts to achieve that outcome. And coordinating those things is not just about determining what you're going to tell people. It's a two-way process that involves feedback, all that kind of stuff. But if no one is taking responsibility and there is no coordination, then we see clients all the time in various systems get to the end of what that service or support can do and being handed off to the ether, where they're missing out on the next step. And for me, that was something that was really, really upsetting and something I saw all the time. And I said, well, we need to do better and we need to coordinate across these things and make sure that we're taking people and ensuring that the opportunities are in front of them to move through from where they are to where they want to be with the adequate support. And again, one of the pushbacks I get from just people, businesses, philanthropists, all kinds of stuff, is that it sounds very complicated. But the way that we do things, I use an analogy to try and explain it in a way, because there's nothing in the system that looks like this. If you wanted to build a house, you wouldn't line the trades up and say, who's the most important trade, and give all the money to the plumber. You wouldn't do that. It's a silly way to try and build, because the plumber would then just put all the plumbing in and you'd go, hang on a minute, this doesn't look like the kind of thing that I had in mind when I wanted to build a house. Now, in this system that we work in currently, it's possible that the plumber can still get a 5-star review and pass all its audits because it did everything it said it was going to do. Maybe it had lots of volunteers, maybe it had low overheads, all that kind of stuff, and it delivered all the plumbing that it said it was going to deliver. We don't build like that because it's not a good way to build. What we do is we employ a builder who coordinates all of the trades in the right order, who wants them to be paid on time, to have the resources to do the job, to have the right skills at the right moment, to deliver the thing at the right time, so that we work towards this final sort of product, which is the finished building. And I often point when I'm in the city and things like that, I say, no one thinks it's too complicated to build this 100-story building with the millions and millions of dollars of investment, with the thousands of people involved, with the dozens of trades involved, and the 4 or 5 year timeline to build. But to help someone from a place of despair and addiction and homelessness into housing, community engagement, a job, and feeling okay and no longer suffering from their addiction and having adequate support, people go, that sounds like a lot to deal with for that one person. And it has always struck me as insane that we don't see a problem with the complexity over here building this building, but we do when it comes to helping people. And so being a builder is a kind of skill. It's a skill that requires you to understand a bit of what everyone's doing, to sometimes roll your sleeves up and get stuck in and do something if someone's missing, to make calls and to, make adjustments when things go wrong, to ensure that everyone is coming along at the same time and keeping an eye on each other and doing that stuff. It's a really, really important job, but we don't apply that same process, generally speaking, to the support of people who are in need or for communities that are in need. And so for the Just Be Nice project, our model is really about not having to necessarily do everything yourself, but making sure as the builder, as that support, you're helping people navigate all of this kinds of support and opportunity that they need. Sometimes you're sourcing it. Sometimes sometimes we are rolling our sleeves up and I'm doing things that, just driving someone somewhere or taking them to a place or sitting in a conversation with them or doing something else that a service would normally do, but is not there or doesn't have the capacity at the moment. So sometimes you're rolling your sleeves up. Sometimes you're just getting it done. And that's how we sort of approach looking after people. from a place where they need help to a place where they're now okay. On top of that, we use a few other principles that I think are really useful to pull apart the kinds of challenges that people face. One of which is the responsibility and coordination. We need to look for that when we're looking at systems of support. Who is responsible for this and who is coordinating the various moving parts and being a point of contact? Another one is that we split up the help at a very basic level into human help and logistics. The human help is making sure that people have the human support around them that they need to remain engaged with the opportunities that are being brought to them or that are around them, or to move through the processes they need to move through. Human help is incredibly important. We need to trust some people. We need them. We need people we can lean on. We need encouragement. We need understanding from people. And human help is one half and logistics is the other half, which is having the stuff and the access and the material support that you need as you're being supported through this process. Now, the human help can come from family members who don't have access to all the support bits and pieces that they might need or the knowledge they might need. The human help can come from youth workers, social workers, teammates, workmates. It can come from a range of places. And that logistical support also can come from a range of places too as people move through that process. But one without the other usually means we're going to fall short. And so we're always looking at, is there human help around this person? Do they have that support? Do they have that logistical support? Now, ironically, what I found is in communities where they're resource rich, oftentimes there are plenty of logistic supports around them and maybe a lack of human support, a lack of connection and trust for the people around them. Maybe they don't have great relationships with people. In communities that have less resources, often we don't have a problem with human help, but there's a massive, massive gap to the logistics that they need to get through from the position that they're in to where they want to be. And so understanding that that's a difference is really important when you're trying to bring people together around solving a problem and understanding what kinds of problem you're trying to solve as you move through and the supports that people need. Navigating the silos is very difficult. I touched on that earlier. The different organizations with single purposes and single interventions are really useful. Specialization can be really, really useful if it's coordinated alongside the other specializations. And so again, someone needs to help walk through those bits and pieces. And what I'm always trying to do is remove the competition between those silos and encourage people to build deeper interconnected relationships where we acknowledge and see, one, the shortfalls in each individual piece of the puzzle and the absolute benefit to everybody if we can support and encourage this sort of broader application of lots of different support. Another one that we use is agency and despair. And agency is the outcome that we're always working towards, because there is always a tension between how much encouragement you give someone versus instruction, how much opportunity you give them to direct their own lives and what's going on there versus whether or not you know better. And it sort of shows up a lot in young children where you sort of go, I want you to explore the world and do some stuff, but I don't want you to stick the knife in the toaster. That's like a really obvious example. But certainly when we're helping people, we're not trying to be paternal all the time and just tell them what to do. And even the word paternal, a lot of people don't like it. And I agree, I am empathetic to that. But it's about giving people the opportunity to have support through navigating the different silos while also at the same time working to bring those silos together. And so in that process, you need to have a dialogue with the people and communities that you're helping and understand that there is a tension between instruction and agency always, and what you put in front of people and what you're able to provide them and what they're prepared to do or what they'd like to do. And so we use a framework called community and conduits. And what that means is that in a community where we're trying to make a difference or with an individual, we get feedback about where they're at and where they're getting stuck and how they're feeling about a process so that we can take that either with their human help or into the other logistical support that they're getting and use that feedback to sort of improve the kinds of support that they're getting or find other things that might make sense for them. Now, it's not always about being self-directed because sometimes you work in communities who have these blind spots. but you also work with practitioners who have blind spots and don't understand what the blocks are for people that they're trying to work with. And so we bring this community conduit together to say, here's what we've identified, here's a challenge, here's a problem we're trying to solve. Let's work around the different options we can provide, maximize the agency for everyone involved so that we can get a better outcome. And one example I give is that we work with these children. They were having some poor educational sort of outcomes at school, and they just needed some help. Culturally, for some of these children, the male children education was prioritized over the female children's education. And so if you sent sort of support stuff home with the families, it would get sort of directed to the male children. Now, there were two things that were coming back from the community there. One was that we prefer to just invest in the boys. Okay, absolutely, we understand that. That's one thing that we will work to discuss with and bring them along and show them the benefits and wonderful opportunities presented by equal educational opportunities for boys and girls. But of course, we don't have the time for the girls who are at school. We don't have all that time to wait until we support them. So we provide the support in school for the girls so it doesn't go home and get sort of siphoned off. And then we provide support, human help mostly, around that community to help them see the benefit of educating girls and boys equally. That's a bit more of a long-term process, and we're able to then deal with a short-term problem by supporting the kids in school. And so it's about taking the outcomes that you want, the feedback that you're getting, the realities of the situation, and finding a solution that is providing the maximum amount of agency for everybody involved. And I think that's one really, really important focus that everyone needs when we're trying to design solutions for people. Now, as we get close to the end here, I just wanted to overlay this whole process with an understanding that patience is just so important. Anyone who's been trying to do this work has been involved in research, has been involved in communities that need help or individuals that need help. A lot of people who've just had family members who need help realize that this is a long-term prospect for many people. Changing attitudes takes a long time. Changing systems takes a long time. Securing understanding takes a long time. People who are deeply affected by a range of challenges may take a long time to sort of find their way through those challenges. And so patience is really important, and we don't talk about that enough because I think of the urgency that's always around the intensity of the problem and also the nature of competing causes. But patience is really important. It doesn't mean we don't have an urgent need to resolve these challenges, but it means that in the process, once we start, these things don't tend to resolve themselves really quickly. And if we can calibrate our expectations for a bit more long term, we might find that people don't burn out as quickly or disappoint themselves or the people that they're trying to help as quickly as well, because their expectations are out of whack with the reality of getting these outcomes. And then the other thing that I don't hear talked about enough is trust. And it is so important that we leverage trust and respect it and not take advantage of trust where it exists, because it's incredibly powerful, and cultivate trust when it's not there, when people don't have trust. When people are understandably distrustful of a system or an intervention or a person or the possibility of their own progress, then we need to take the time to build that trust so that they actually lean into the supports that are around them. An opportunity is only as good as so far as it's available, that people want it, that they believe it's an opportunity, and that they trust that if they lean into it, that things will happen in relative to how they expect them to happen, or that they'll be supported through any sort of ups, downs, and trips along the way. And when we make policies and we throw money at things or don't throw money at things, or we talk about how to best support people, it's really, really important that we center all the time the importance of trust in the communications that we're having, a removal of the sort of competitive nature of how we do a lot of stuff. And in that process of putting trust at the front and center of what we're trying to do, assuming good intent wherever we can. And that's something that I wanted to leave you with as I finish up today is that if we assume good intent when we have these conversations and when we do this work, assume good intent with people who maybe don't understand all the nuances of the work that we're doing or the circumstances we find ourselves in, then it makes the conversations and the work a lot more pleasant and a lot better. And it's part of demonstrating the change that we'd like to see. Having patience for people we're trying to help and having patience for people who we would like to help us to help, who maybe don't get it. You know, listening to people, being proactive, practicing that patience, meeting people where they are, and aligning our aspirations. And of course, at the very fundamental level, and the reason why it's called the Just Be Nice project is because the very simple starting point for everyone is to just be nice to one another. We can all, generally speaking, be a little bit nicer in our interactions on a day-to-day basis. We can all leave an interaction and think, maybe I could have been a bit nicer here or a bit nicer there. And it doesn't matter if you're a toddler and you're learning about being nice, or you're an octogenarian who has, you know, gone for a cup of coffee and is looking for the smallest possible thing that you can do to just improve the pathway to looking after people and your community a little bit better. So I'm here for questions. If anyone's got any questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to come and listen to me chat about this stuff. I could go on for days and days. I'm sure you can tell I've barely taken a breath, but I really appreciate everyone's attention and interest. And if you have questions that you don't want to put in the chat here, by all means, reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might come my way, and hopefully support you in your journey to looking after everybody else.
Very much, Josh. That was absolutely fantastic and quite inspiring. While we wait